Welcome to Pod Breaks Africa, the sweet and sour bits of passion, where we interview African podcasters sharing their experiences, including successes, challenges, and failures, providing knowledge for budding African creatives who have chosen the spark and want to invest in their passion.
Hi everyone, you're welcome tonight. Okay, I can see Lamb Sisterhood, Felix. Thank you so much for joining in. We'll be starting by 7. Let's just wait for more people to join in. Thank you for coming in. Thank you. As we wait for them to join in, I'm just going to be giving us a brief intro about what we are here for tonight, what to expect. So, as we all know, tonight is APVA's Pod Breaks. So, when we say APVA's Pod Breaks, it means a session that is centered around podcasting. Here we want to talk about podcasting, teaching podcasters to podcast the right way. I don't know if you understand that flow. So tonight's topic is they are back. Hi, all right. So let me invite to speak. You've been invited to speak, ladies. Tonight we'll be having the Lamb Sisterhood. When they join in, you will get to know more about them. Yeah. If you ladies can hear me, please let me know because I can't see you anymore. All right, as I was saying, so tonight's session, I want to dig deep into podcasts. Now, this will be podcast for educated narratives, for entrepreneurs, not just podcasts for entertainment, podcasts that I would say that have like specific missions to evaluate things in Africa or in a specific area to leverage your craft. So tonight, we want to talk about using podcasts to tell entrepreneurial and educated narratives. And we have the Lamb Sisterhood. That is, we have 3 ladies right here. We have Aliyah, we have Annie, and we have Laura joining us tonight. I don't know, I'm unable to, I'm meant to see them here as a speaker, but they are not popping up, so we are going to be waiting for them. I don't know. Okay, now, all right, you guys are on. Can you hear me?
Hear us?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful.
We've been trying to troubleshoot. The technology has not been technology.
It happens a lot, I understand. All right. Okay, so since you ladies are here, we would like for you to introduce yourselves. So in case you guys don't know, listening, they are in one location, so they're going to just take turns as they wish to speak. So thank you for joining us tonight. First of all, let's start with introductions. So let's know who is who, and we can get started from there.
Okay, we can go in lamb order because we're all fighting about who will go first. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for sparing your Friday evening to come and listen to us talk. My name is Laura Ekumbo. I'm the L in the Lamb Sisterhood. I love stories.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alea, and I am the A in the Lamb Sisterhood, and I am a writer and a performer.
Hey everybody, my name is Anne Mora. I am the M in the Lamb Sisterhood, same writer, storyteller, and the Lamb Sisterhood is a content studio that tells stories for African women to feel seen, heard, and beloved.
And the creators of the Cabrazen podcast.
Stories of brazen African women for our little ones. And all the little at heart.
Amazing. I was about to ask that question. What brought about the Lamb sister? Like, are you ladies sisters, blood sisters, or sisters by heart? So you can tell us your story. How did this come about?
Sure.
Sisters by
choice.
By choice and accident. I think it started in 2017. The 3 of us came together to write a stage play called Brazen with Too Early for Birds. And we were really kind of looking for the women in our history. And so the show Uninvisible, the lives of 6 brazen Kenyan women And it was one of those moments where we were trying to understand what the lives of the women before us had been like, how they'd kind of coped with the moment in that time. And in this 9-month long experiment that it took to write the show Brazen, we found that we really loved working together. And we found that we weren't the only ones hungry for the kinds of stories that we were interested in telling. And so we were really interested in what it looks like to be able to do this professionally, to set up structures that means that we could actually earn a living, and also kind of contribute to the ecosystem so that others might also be able to kind of benefit from the same, and also earn a living from their art and their craft and the things that give their heart joy.
Wow, that's cool. That's really cool. Thank you. Um, so concerning, even though I wish I knew who spoke. I don't know.
That was me, Alea. Sorry. We'll be sure to say
Sorry.
Say
who's
Alea
speaking.
over.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. All right. So like the stories, the podcast, bringing it up, that's really cool. Um, Now about the podcast, right? What was the idea behind? Okay, I know it started from, as you said, working together on this project. That now I think I would say it became a podcast. But like, what was the story behind that? No, we're all storytellers. So like, tell us that story.
Sure. It's a bit convoluted. I think I'll start with pandemic times when a lot of people on the continent were making podcasts. Oh, hi, Laura speaking. Somebody just reminded me to announce myself. um, and yeah, as a company that was formed around theater, that was a shock for us, and we started to discover all the different ways that we could exist. And there were a few podcast workshops that we were a part of, and we wound up making a pilot podcast based on Brazen, a concept of Brazen, for an adult audience, the Biki Dude podcast, which is still in our bank somewhere. And through the process of making that, we discovered that we actually liked to play with audio as a medium. We were good at it. And we applied for a residency, now seeking funding to continue existing. We applied for a residency with that pilot, and we won it. And when we started to develop that podcast idea further, that was the Brazen podcast, it wasn't working out.
It was a very expensive podcast to develop because of the research and production process.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we pivoted.
Yeah, yeah. And around that time, all of us were aunties. all of us had a sibling, at least as one sibling who had children, or a child, and were really inspired by being aunties, and started to explore what it looks like to make content for them, because they were consuming media that doesn't reflect our lived experiences as Africans. It doesn't reflect their lived experiences. And we wanted to create nourishing content for them. So we pivoted our podcasting idea for something for adults to something for children. And it's also, there's another part of the story, the Makatilili.
Ah, yes. So when we first, oh, this is Alea, by the way.
Mora keeps reminding us to announce ourselves.
Mora's job today is to remind us. When we did Brazen, the stage show, which was for adults, a couple of weeks after, we were invited to come and talk about the process of making the play. And we were there, and it was a panel discussion, and you know how these things are. And this wonderful human had brought her children, had 2 children, to the event. And those children were getting so bored. They were just sitting there, like, listening to us talk about, like, adult things and just getting bored out of their brain. And so in one of the breaks, we we sort of noticed them, and we were chatting with them, and we're like, how do we entertain them? It's really boring being dragged along to adult things when you're kids. And so one of the stories that we told was the story of Mekatilili Wamenza, who led one of the successful uprisings against the colonials, and at the age of 70 walked over 1,000 kilometers to escape from where she was imprisoned in Kisi back to her home, Kilifi, twice. And so we were just kind of playing around with the story, and we started thinking about how do we make this story entertaining and relevant for these two little kids who were bored out of their brain. And in that moment, as we started telling the story, the colonialists or the colonizers transformed into giant frogs, and Mekatilili was trying to get her, songs and dances saved. And the story just kind of transformed, and the kids' reactions and their energy also kind of co-created this incredible thing. And that was the birth of Cabrazen. So Ka means small, so it's like small brazen. And part of the impulse behind those stories was, one is we just didn't want for the next couple of generations to have to go looking for these stories in the ways that we did. And the second thing I think also is that theater is if you're not present in that moment, in that space, the story disappears. Whereas what's so cool about podcasting is you can listen to it anywhere, at any time, and then it becomes part of the archive. And that was very important to us, is how can these stories be enduring and be accessed by children and caregivers around the world, and that they can listen to them over and over again. Because that's been one of the really interesting things, is how much children listen to the same episode like 6, 7, 8, 9 times, and that they're really looking for things that they can return to over and over again.
Wow, I can relate to that because even as an adult, I look for stories that I wish I could just find them, like African stories that our parents told us, but there's no documents, nothing. It's just storytelling, which is still great. But since we have tech, why don't we use our platforms to save those stories and give the younger generation what they need? That's so cool. Like I've never heard this story before, and this is really great. Yeah.
Thank you.
So speaking about using podcasts, because I can see that you found a space that needed to be filled up, and you guys did that. So using podcasts, how can we entrepreneurs or people who want to share stories for either the younger generation, or speaking to women, or speaking to men themselves, sharing some specific narratives, how can we use podcasts to do that?
Hey, this is Mora speaking now.
Okay.
I think how you can use podcasts. I think one is podcasts. I think it's always important to remember that every medium of storytelling is simply a medium. Like a story can be told on a podcast, or on a book, in a book, or on TV, or in theater, right? Stories can exist in many formats. If you think about podcasting, I'd say to entrepreneurs and creators, what's the specific benefit a podcast is giving you that the other mediums are not? Whether it's, maybe resources. You can do a podcast if you have a mic and a recording tool, aka a phone. Maybe that's
Yeah.
might be you want to get a mass audience, which was one of the thinkings for Cabrazen. So while it hasn't happened yet, one of our long-term goals is to get on radio, because radio is still the number one medium for the continent, and Cabrazen wants to talk to every African child. And if you're going to talk to every African child, you got to get on radio. So that was a natural fit. For us, another factor was just the ability to make the kind of high quality stories that I think, as the Lamb Sisterhood, we have deeply invested in that. And that podcast audio, really specifically Cabrazen, where it's kind of narrative, very creative narrative nonfiction that's rooted in a lot of research. we're like, that's a really good medium that allows us to use the skills we had from before, which is our theater and storytelling skills. So it translates really beautifully to an audio medium like Cabrazen. And so we went through a bunch of different mediums. We really thought through why a podcast, not just saying, let me do a podcast. Because maybe the thing you need to do is a flyer. Maybe the thing you need to do is a book. Like really challenging yourself as a creator. Is this the real medium that I need? For example, our podcast is just a podcast. There's no video yet because we're deeply intentional about like, if you want a video element, it has to accomplish specific goals. It can't just be video for the sake of just being on YouTube. That's nothing wrong with that if choice you're making, but it should be intentional. So, and then in making the decision, I'd say something we've taught in classes and workshops we've taught is when you're trying to figure out what's the best decision to make, we think about a lot of different factors, but two really big factors are your intention as a creator, whether it's your intention artistically, morally, ethically, financially, like what is your personal mission as a maker? And the other side is the audience. Who's the audience you're speaking to and why? Because different audiences have different needs. We're speaking to very young children, for example. So the stories had to be compelling, creative, and repeatable. We knew it had to be a trusted voice because these are young children. You have to have a voice that they can trust. We knew that there's certain safety considerations we have to have in each sentence because, for example, we had one story at the early concept, the children are climbing on each other's shoulders. And when we tested, immediately the parent said, that line, my child is going to climb on her sister's shoulders and it's going to be a whole problem. So we knew we had to keep that line in the script. So there's a lot of keeping in mind your personal intention because it matters as an artist and as a producer, an artist yourself, if you're interested in producing art, intention matters, and your audience, and not feeling too tied, really being intentional about the medium itself.
Yeah, that's very true. Please, you can continue. I heard the voice.
I was saying that's it. End of point.
All right. All right. That's very true. And looking at it, this was like going to, how should I put this now? You started something for adults, you moved to children, and I know, with children, it's not just cut and join. You need to have sound effects. You need to have um a great voice that they can listen to. Not like your voice must be great, but like when you're recording, you need to know how to put your voice, sound well, pronounce the words well, and all those kind of things. And I would like to know, did you guys face any challenge with the fact of telling these stories to children and at the same time using podcasts as a medium? Because children can be visual beings, if I want to put them in that way, whereby they need colors, they need stuff. So how did you get it done? And did you face challenges with that?
Yeah, this is Mora speaking again. I'll talk a little bit in response to that about two elements. And then Laura and Alea will jump in with more. But the two I want to focus on for that is research and the writing process. So when we're talking about working for children, one of the first things we did was just desktop research, right? We are aunties. All of us had worked in children's education in one shape or form in our careers previously. So we had some sense, but ultimately we didn't know fully. And so just basic desktop research. And even in that, we found a lot of really interesting things. Like, for example, against a very common misconception is that children don't have long attention spans. Young children have very long attention spans, over an hour. And it grows less as you grow older up until when you get to like 10 or 13 or something like that. But they can, and if you think about it, think about how a 2-year-old can bang the same drum for 3 hours, no matter what you tell them. That's an attention span. So like
That's true.
yeah, that's them being attentive to something. It's just that what they're attentive to isn't something you're interested in. So you find it irritating, but they're fully attentive. And the challenge for those, our target age is 4 to 7, is 4 to 9, 4 to 7, thereabouts. So we had to just really understand what, like I said in the beginning, intention on audience. What are their needs as an audience? The kind of the length of the sentences, the depth of the material. We had to really do a lot of research, and that really helped. And then the second thing is when it comes to writing, I agree that I think for children's productions, having higher quality value production is very helpful. But also children, again, you tell a child a good story, they listen. Like if it's interesting to them, they'll listen. The first iterations of Cabrazen were live performances with very little background and music. And we still do a lot of live performances of the Cabrazen stories. And that partly comes from making sure that we have really strong scripts. So it takes a lot of time and we're trying to speed up our process, and that's been a challenge. But we take research, we research all the characters that we feature, and then we take a lot of time on the stories. Like the writer writes it, one of us will edit it, we'll go back to the writer, edit it again, do another pass, and then every single script we three review together at the end and refine it literally line by line to make sure that it's up to par. So the big challenge from that is our particular process. Not everyone might apply this, but our process is very, very slow and very intensive. But it was on purpose in part. It can improve, it can be faster, but it was on purpose in part because we knew we wanted to make episodes that were evergreen and could be listened to 20 years from now and could be relevant. And it takes time to make something that can, the story and story, language, and tone that actually can sustain itself beyond a particular moment. So that was really challenging, but it's kind of paying off in terms of the quality of the material. And I'll hand over to Laura to talk about some other challenges and lessons.
Yeah, I guess picking up on quality, this is Laura speaking now. We knew we wanted our little ones to have the highest quality of our podcast. We wanted to do the best version of our podcast that we could for our little ones, which meant an immersive experience, something that they could really like sink their teeth in, for lack of a better phrase. And so even in terms of like the sound design, how can we bring them into a world and how can we build a world with sounds from here? This is the other thing with podcasting is we so often use sound effects and sound cards from different parts of the world. We worked with a really good sound engineer and a really cool producer to make the theme song and make sure that all the sounds that we were using were from, if they could be from the actual location. Like, for example, Nelly Cheboy, who is in our second season, our sound engineer, collected sounds from Mogotio, thank you for reminding me, which is where Nelly Cheboy, a good part of the story, actually all of the story takes place. So making sure that they had real sounds that sounded like they could be from their backyard or from their cousin's place or from their grandmother who they visit every once in a while, recognizable sounds, immersive sounds was super important. And then when it comes to the performance, the host, the voice, by default, I think because I'm a performing artist and I'm also a perfectionist, I tested this a lot with my niece. So I would read the stories out to her and see her response. And her attention span, as Mora said, she was listening. The first episode, the pilot episode, when we did our scratch recording, it was about 9 minutes. When I told that story to my niece, she heard it, she listened to it, and we were sitting outside just enjoying the day. And then another human came outside and asked what was going on. And my niece repeated the story, almost verbatim, told it better, actually, in 8 minutes. So when Mora speaks about the intentionality that went into the research and in the writing, the text of it was working hard because the repetition was making it super easy for her to retain that information. Now, the layer that's added on top of that is a caring performance, a performance that's attentive to those repetitive words, so that you're saying them in a rhythmic way, in a melodic way, so that children latch onto them and they feel like they can say them. One of the things that was super important for each of the episodes, for the brazen concept at large, is that people who hear the stories of these women know their names, which is why each episode starts with us teaching the listener how to pronounce the name, and we do it together. So already you're engaging with call and response, you're engaging the audience in a way that brings them in so they feel like they can participate. So when you get to the singing, they want to sing with you, hopefully. And that even that on its own, engaging with the story in that way makes it easier for you to retain that. Now I've lost sight of your question, right? You asked about challenges. I haven't spoken about any challenges. Huh? I think, yeah.
I have a writing challenge.
Okay.
One of the things that is challenging with Cabrazen specifically is we're reimagining the stories of these women as fantastical fables, so to speak. And like, how do you take a concept like colonialism and explain it in a way that a 4-year-old will understand? How do you take ideas of like, mental health, apartheid, like some of these concepts are, big and complex and very contextual, and that's a thing that as the writers we would spend, and as Lamb we would spend really a lot of time breaking down and trying to understand how to make sure that we're not leaving anyone behind and that it's both informative and entertaining and makes sense for them at wherever they are in their lives, and is also truthful to the idea behind the concept.
And thank you for saying that. Now I've remembered the challenge. I think also, Mora spoke about us doing live episodes, but when you're recording an episode in the booth, it's you by yourself. There's no child in there to give you a response. You have to imagine them. You have to think about pacing. You have to imagine this human in front of you. It's really you have to perform these stories. You can't just read them off the script in the booth flatly. They have to be rehearsed, and I think that is a challenge, because with most podcasts you should be able to just read it off the script, but with this one it needs to be rehearsed, overly rehearsed, so that you can make choices about how you're going to approach certain parts. And then when you're in the booth, if you're trying to save on studio time, because you know which podcast is making enough to earn to pay for extra studio time, it means you have to be super, super clear about your choices and follow through with everything that you've decided.
When people say podcasting is easy, I laugh. And this is like an evidence that it's not like podcasting is bad. It's not, but it can be stressful. And that's to show how much passion we have as African podcasters. We put in our all: editing, scripts, recording, even personal expenses to make sure our podcast sounds so great and good for our audience. We put in that work, and me, I will say thank you. You guys are doing so well. All right. So let's go towards the aspect of storytelling. I hear a lot of storytelling, and for us to utilize podcasts, we need to be able to tell that story well. Because if we can't tell that story well, we can't grab the attention of our audience. We can't um, explain what we have in our hearts to them. So, how can we tell our stories? Now, everyone has it like their own story. Everyone has their own story to tell. I have my Charles might have his, and Felix and Simba. What are those strategies you would advise us? Because you ladies, I can see you know a lot about storytelling. What strategies would you tell us to hold on to when producing our own podcast in order to tell those stories in the great way that they deserve?
Yeah, I can answer that a little bit. This is Mora. I'll speak as almost more like an editor than a writer, because I think the editor part of me is the one that's kind of like, how do I make a story work? That's the number one question on a good editor is, at least the kind of editing I like to ask. So it's something I think about a lot. I'd say number one is to release the idea that there's a right or a wrong way. I think if the story feels true to you, it's more likely to feel true to a reader. So the first thing is to just kind of release any kind of pressure that it should be like X, and really for you to design what your X is. Like a strong editor is, I'm really speaking as an editor, but the tips apply for writing. In a strong edit process, you're not trying to fix a word, you're trying to find the best word to communicate a message. You're not trying to fix a sentence. You're trying to find what's the best sentence to say the thing that that sentence didn't quite say. What's the best scene to communicate that thing that the scene was missing? You're always just trying to find the best possible solution. So that's what I think writers ought to do, especially when you're editing. Number two, edit, 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 edit. Like your first draft, we call them vomit drafts in our office because they're basically vomit. You're just pouring out words, whatever comes out, it'll be ugly, it'll taste bad, no one likes it. That's normal for a first draft. Get it out. Once it's on the page, you can fix it. Once it's on the page, you can tweak it. If you're doing something that's less narrative driven, because we are doing such a heavy narrative podcast that's scripted in advance, if you're doing more kind of talking heads, even something as simple as like, if it's a conversational type of podcast, something as simple as taking the time to just know what your segments are, to have your list of topics, to have your list of questions, to have, one flashcard with your 5 talking points. Even that, very few people are, honestly, I've only maybe heard of 1 or 2 podcasts where somebody just arrives at the studio and they talk for an hour and it works. Like it's very, very few podcasts, even the ones that sound casual, are as casual as you might think. They're considered and edited. And the last thing I'd say is, and then maybe Laura and Delia can add on, but the last thing I'd say is do your best to consume the medium you're making in. If you're trying to make podcasts, listen to podcasts. If you're trying to write a book, read books. If you're trying to make films, watch films. If you're, especially at the beginning, especially if it's a new medium, like right when we're deciding to make a podcast, I was listening to podcasts all hours of the day. I think I listen to less now, but I feel a bit more confident in the medium. So now I can be a bit more selective to what I listen to, either on interest or whether I'm listening out of just it's fun or out of a curiosity about a technique. But otherwise, I don't feel the need to immerse on the same level. But when we're starting, I was barely into podcasts. So I was like, oh, okay, how does this work? And so you're just listening to everything everywhere. You're looking at all the kids' podcasts and trying different episodes. So listen to, like, engage in the medium that you're making in. If you don't do that, you might make something good, but you're going to struggle, and you're probably not going to make something as good as if you actually just engaged with the medium. I think those are my 3 main tips.
I think this is Alea. I would say something I find helpful is to think about 2 questions. One is, what is the story I want to tell? And then 2 is, how do I want to tell the story? And I find sometimes that if I'm not clear about what the story is and I don't separate them out, then I get stuck. So I want to tell the story of, for example, I want to tell my life story. I'm clear about what the story is and what it's made up of. Now, the how do I want to tell it? There's so many different ways that I could tell my life story. I could tell it as a thriller. I could tell it as a, as a like a memoir. I could tell it. There's just many different techniques. And I think sometimes if you aren't clear that those are 2 different questions, you can get stuck in the writing process. So yeah, that's what I would say.
This is. Oh, go ahead. You can also proceed.
Sorry.
I was just gonna add something. We're actually together because we're writing together, and I was gonna add the one back as like maybe the most important thing to address in storytelling is audience and intention. Who are you making it for, and why are you making it for them? If you can be clear about those 2 things, that becomes your compass. And I think sometimes as storytellers, even we underestimate that. And when we get lost on the path of trying to tell a story, we find that we don't have clarity, or we're not on the same page about who it's for, or we're not on the same page about the intention. So those 2 things are important to establish.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Let me just do a little recap here because I think I need to be writing down some points because I am a podcaster and I need these tips, especially in storytelling, right? Because I know it's the story that will keep them wanting more and not just the name of your podcast and stuff like that. exactly as you said, who is your audience? What are you starting a podcast for? And I also remember the part of podcast is a platform. It can be through books, it can be through radio and other means, but podcasting is maybe your platform to use to share that story. Thank you so much, ladies. We have some questions, and I think we'll just take the questions, one more question, and we'll take the questions and another question from me, and we'll be done. So we have some questions here. I'm going to just pick. I don't know. Should I just pick two or I should pick one? It's from the same person. Sambasa podcast asked this question, and he said, what's the difference between a child's narrative story and an adult narrative story, minus the adult content? So he's asking that question. Let's start with that one.
Sure. Difference between adult and child, excluding the content. So, big thing is you just have to get people at the level of understanding. A 4-year-old literally won't know as many words, can't follow as complex a sentence. Those are really kind of obvious not obvious, but like those are researchable. Desktop research can give you a lot of information as to like just the basics of like language levels, understanding what to expect. A lot of the research that's publicly available is a bit Western, so you might have to kind of recontextualize it for your audience if you're speaking to African audiences. So for example, there's a lot of like, kids are so rebellious. I'm like, not on this continent, not in the same way, just because the consequences can be so dire. So these are just a way children move differently here versus in the West. So you kind of have to keep kind of read the that children are also full, complete human beings. I think there's a way sometimes people think because children can't access certain levels of information, that will be protected from certain sorts of information. It doesn't mean they don't have these questions. It doesn't mean that they don't need a complete story with a complete arc, with layers and nuances and things to look for and hunt for and feel challenged by. So for example, we know the kind of language level that works for Cabrazen, but we'll always throw in a couple of kind of stretchy big words. Because for the kid who'll be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. You were just saying how your nephew is obsessed with the word chronological at age 6, you know? Like there's things like that. And even in terms of feeling, like just because a child can't articulate their grief doesn't mean they don't feel grief. So we have an episode on Fatma and Mariam where they're the women who built the first and oldest university in the world that's still standing in Morocco. So it happened because their father died and left them an inheritance. And so they built this university with their inheritance. And as you wrote the episode, like, we can't just have the death of a father for children where the death of a parent is such a present fear, and or they may have experienced that themselves without sitting with that fear and recognizing that this is a human being who's having to face such a difficult emotion. Plus they're a child, so they don't really know that that's what they're handling. So you have to really approach them as complete human beings and think, okay, they will feel full grief. They are full human beings. They are children, so they don't understand it fully. So how do I explain that to them in a language that is at their level? Rather than saying, children don't understand things, let me give them something simple. That doesn't work. I don't think it's as effective as like they're full people with just a little bit less capacity than you might have. That's it. But yeah, the differences are kind of vast. You can do a whole course about it, but I'd say those are the two main ones. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That means
That's a good question.
they're human beings, just need to be at least
Just
be
meet them at their
specific in
level.
their own skill. Yeah. All right, let's go to number 2 question. He said you talked of social issues based on the recent events regarding theater. He said about Kenya, theater in Kenya. What do you feel your space or calling will be with regard to teaching the younger generation?
We love teaching, man. We love teaching.
I'm not sure I caught the first part of the question clearly. Uh,
Okay,
mm,
can you hear me?
yes.
Yes.
All right, he said you talked of social issues based on the recent events regarding theater in Kenya. What do you feel about your space or calling will be? What do you feel your space or calling will be with regard to teaching the younger generation?
Well, okay, I think we have many views about this.
Yeah.
The first instinct behind the very original Brazen was an idea of connecting to the women before us who had done this like liberatory work, and connecting and understanding the ways that they had done it so that we could bring those insights and strengths and learnings into our own lives as we trying to engage with the same or similar sorts of issues, but wanting to do so in a way that really allowed for nuance and complexity, which is something that so often these stories are missing and they lack. So the very origin of Brazen and Cabrazen stemmed from that. I think the other thing is that a lot of the time, children and also adults are taught that to participate in making your world a better place, it means that you have to be only this way, and this kind of work only looks like this way. Like you have to be an activist, which means, you know, activism looks like this, or you have to be, this kind of profession. And one of the things we're really keen to do through Cabrazen is show children that how they are is valuable as they are, and that they have something to contribute to making their world a better place. So that's a very intrinsic value. And I think that that's something that we're recognizing and seeing more and more in social movements, that we're kind of, that we're stronger together, and that imagining freedom and working for a better world for all of us means that all of us can bring our different skills. And if whether your skill is actually being quiet and just observing and being patient, or whether your skill is like rallying the people around you, or whether your skill is just like that resilience and determination of like keeping one foot in front of the other, like recognizing what's in you and being able to bring it to the world is valuable. um, and then the second thing I would say is that last year, in June 2024, we had a lot of parents asking about how they could talk to their children about um, what was happening in Kenya at the time with the protests, with the Gen Z movement, with revolutionary ideas. Children are present, they're listening, they know what's going on, and parents were really struggling with having those conversations. And so we put together a guide which can be found on our website, which kind of offers caregivers um, ideas on how to use specific Cabrazen episodes to have these conversations with their children. I'm trying to think of very specific examples. Like, what is a protest, for example? And that episode is Zarina Patel story, and how she and other people, she galvanized other people to save Jivanji Gardens from being knocked down, and a parking lot being put by Moy, for example. Um, so it's very much a teaching opportunity, and even within the episode, we really are very intentional about creating spaces within interactive spaces within each episode where we ask the children questions so that they can have some of these conversations with their caregivers.
Yeah. And I want to add on that when it comes to theater really specifically, and I think storytelling specifically, and I believe this is true for all of Africa, but certainly it's fact for Kenya, revolutionary conversations have always been central to the art. I think even something like theater, we call on Michere Mugo. Michere Mugo is one of our heroes and inspirations. And she was exiled from Kenya in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken, and if about the dates. So like, I do think that the easiest way to kind of think about the future is for us has always been to reflect on the past. And revolution is a fundamental part of Africa. Like fighting for what we believe in and what's right has been always fundamental. And I think it's innate in our artistry. So it's always hard for me to be like, so what about the future? I'm like, I really don't know, but in a weird way, I'm not concerned because our roots and our history are, what's the Martin Luther King quote? The arc of history is long, but it always bends towards justice. I think our histories show that really clearly. And so for me, when it comes to the future, it comes back to the stuff Alea was saying of like, okay, what can you do with the tools that you have? How can you support the people in your area, in your life, and the communities around you, and do your best work in your best capacity and help all the other people who are doing such incredible, cool things, like those girls who were killing it, the Butera girls, just wonderful. So yeah, I'm just very much a fan of finding ways to support artists in doing the art that they want to do, because I believe that out of that, inevitably, we'll get some really beautiful, powerful, surprisingly revolutionary work. Even something as simple as a really good joke can feel revolutionary, you know? There's a lot of beautiful things that can happen when we allow people to make the art that they want to make.
Hi, Sambasa. I hope this answers your question. Thank you so much, sisterhood, if I want to call you collectively. Thank you for being here. So before we go, we've come to the end of this session, but we'll have one more question for you. Is there any exciting news or exciting projects that is coming up that you would love to tell us about?
Well, reason we have all new of last season's episode is out, so season 2 is up and out on the website, all for free in both English and Kiswahili. We also have a bunch of different projects kind of in the works. As a lot of you here are creators, you know that you can have like 58 things happening and people are like, what are you doing? I can't say it. However, if you visit our LinkedIn, is actually, I think we're more active. And also the Cabrazen website, www.cabrazen.com, and follow our Twitter. You're here on the space. Thank you, everybody. We'll kind of get a lot more updates. There's a lot of children's material that's available for free as well. We really love working on kids things. So there's another really wonderful project called The Mysteries of Jabali and Sauti, which has hundreds of stories available in audio, animation, comic books, motion comics, and print children's books, plus a bonus kind of game book that you can play games with your kids in the house. There's a lot of like really cool stuff happening, but I'd say the number one is our favorite. Let me not say favorite. We don't have favorites, but one of our favorite babies, which is Cabrazen.
It's our favorite baby.
It's our favorite baby. It will be in all the languages and it will be live everywhere. That's the world domination.
Amazing. Okay. I feel like clapping. That sounds really good. It's all loaded. I love the fact that it goes around all sides. So there's animation, there's stories, a lot of stories you can't just get tired of. Thank you so much, ladies, for being here. Thank you for being part of this session. I have learned. I'm sure everyone here has learned a lot. Thank you, Sambasa Podcast. Thank you, Felix. Thank you, Imo. Thank you, Semba. Thank you, John Musa, for being here. This is APVA Sport Breaks Africa, and we will be having another session soon. We do sessions every month for the audio creatives. For sure, we're all out to amplify the African voices. So we'll see you all another time.
Thank you so much for holding the space. Thank you for inviting us. You've been a wonderful moderator.
We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. All right, thank you. Okay.
Good night. Have a lovely
Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the episode. Become a member of APVA today. Visit apva.africa to learn more.